My name's Connor O'Hara, and you're listening to Pro Lacrosse Talk.
On Schreiber.
Sidearm whip, scars!
Now in front, Pannell scores! Paul Rabel splits two and scores!
Kylie Ohlmiller showing off those shifty skills.
Kelly, not shy, bounces one home! What a start!
Welcome to Pro Lacrosse Talk, the voice of Pro Lacrosse. I'm Hutton, he's Adam. Together we're bringing you interviews with your favorite players and coaches, as well as news from all 4 professional lacrosse leagues. We're stoked to have you guys for another episode of Pro Lacrosse Talk. Adam's coming to you from Baltimore, and I'm once again in the DC metro area for the week. Adam, how's it going?
I'm good, man. We had some exciting games this past weekend, so I'm ready to kind of get going and talk about them.
Yeah, no, we had some great games, a lot of PLL playoff shakeup from this past weekend. We're also going to talk game attendance for the PLL and MLL and what could happen to either of these 2 leagues down the road.
Yep.
So some big topics to discuss, but before we get started, let's go into our fast break.
On Saturday, the Cannons knocked off the Bayhawks 12-11 in OT to take over at the top of the standings. The Blaze beat the Lizards also in OT 14-13, and the Rattlers got yet another win, defeating the Outlaws 17-12. On the PLL side of things, the Chaos defeated the Archers 11-10 in OT. The Atlas had a big win against the Chrome, eliminating the Chrome from the playoffs 17-14, and the Whipsnakes absolutely destroyed the Redwoods 17-4, which will have big playoff implications, which we'll talk about in a few minutes.
Great, so that was our fast break. You mentioned the Cannons Bayhawks game. I was fortunate enough to go to that game, but a great evening honoring our military. It was their Military Appreciation Day. They had dozens of veterans honored before the game. They even had a parachuter fly down before, and having it all at their home venue of Navy Marine Corps Memorial Stadium made for a great event. Another personal pleasure of mine was being able to be in the press box where my late grandfather, James Hutton Jackson, used to sit and cover Navy athletics for the Baltimore Sun. He was a longtime sports writer in Baltimore and a member of the Baltimore Lacrosse Hall of Fame. I never met him, but I'm named after him, so it was kind of surreal following in his footsteps and being there for that game. But following that game, I was fortunate enough to speak with both Cannons attackman Connor O'Hara, who had a hat trick on the day, and then Bayhawks long stick midi Jesse Bernhardt. There was a Bayhawks fireworks display after the game, so quite a bit of background noise, but still some great commentary on the game. So let's take a listen to what they had to say. All right, so Connor, you had a hat trick today. You guys pulled out the overtime victory. How is it to be at the top of the standings now?
No, it's great. This league's so competitive, and any game, anything can happen. So we're just taking it one game at a time and not really, looking too far forward and anything behind us. So,
what do you think you played so well today, and what do you think was the difference maker in this win today?
It was just a scrappy win. Chesapeake's a tough team. They like to, yuck it up in there. And it wasn't a high-scoring game, 12-11, so just good team win, no one doing too much, and just moving the ball and being unselfish.
All right, so Jesse, tough loss today, but you guys, you grinded. You're still at the top of the standings. What do you guys think you can improve on going from this loss?
I think we could just really look back at ourselves. I think a lot of things we're shooting ourselves in the foot, whether it was fundamental stick work or just some simple, scouting decisions on the defensive end. I thought we got some saves in cage, and Massa gave us a shot at the face-off X. So again, I think it's just kind of taking a look in the mirror at ourselves and just clean some things up, and I think we'll be okay.
All right, what did you think of this home crowd today? You guys had a good turnout. What do you think of the fans?
Yeah, we always do a great job. BK and the Annapolis community do a fantastic job tonight, being Military Appreciation Night and playing in Navy Marine Corps. It's a special opportunity to have a bunch of veterans and groups that support those at the game is something special, especially here in Annapolis.
So it was great talking to Connor O'Hara and Jesse Bernhardt. As Jesse mentioned, it was a great crowd at Navy Marine Corps Memorial Stadium for Military Appreciation Day. That kind of brings into one of a fan question that we've had. At Redhead Racing asked us how the PLL and MLL game attendance has fared in 2019. So, the Bayhawks game was pretty good. You had around 2,000 fans there, maybe a little bit more than that. That kind of, brings us to a topic of discussion that's been really talked about a lot, Adam, and that is, how are these leagues doing in terms of attendance? And, how important is attendance in general? So given the data, what we have to go off of, I'll tell you the PLO's numbers that they've been providing have been pretty good. 4,430 average per game, 16,000 in Baltimore was the big standout, and even the 8,000 in LA for just the one All-Star game was also a good turnout. So they're doing pretty well. It's not great numbers, but it's definitely solid for what they're going for. MLL's been kind of harder to pinpoint. Cannons and Bayhawks have historically had crowds from 1,000 to 3,000, with Outlaws getting crowds of around 5,000. And the important thing to remember about attendance numbers is there's always number skewing. A lot of these numbers that they announce are actually based on ticket sales, so we are not completely sure, even how the PLL comes up with its numbers because they do have the 2 games on a day. Sometimes it appears they're counting it twice since it's a doubleheader, so they get the per game number. Other weekends like Baltimore, the numbers were a little bit different, because they had an earlier game in the day, and then they had the sold-out crowd at Homewood later that night. So, again, it's kind of hard to nail down these numbers, but it kind of brings us into the overall discussion about attendance. So, Adam, how important do you think attendance is for these leagues?
I think it varies depending on which league you're really talking about. You'll hear in our upcoming interview with Coach Dom Starjo, the Chrome, that he talked about with the PLL. Some of the main investors don't find the actual game day crowd to be the most pivotal thing currently. They're utilizing the social media side of things, the social media outreach, and the online viewership as maybe a bigger parameter for them this year. Hutton, you talked to Paul and Mike a couple months ago in your article and talked about their 3-year plan for the league and how they are planning on utilizing. Obviously, ticket sales is something they're looking at, but mainly the revenue that may be brought in from the social media aspect of things, as well as the viewership. So it'll be interesting to see at the end of the year what those numbers look like, but I don't think it's as big of a thing for the PLL as it is for the MLL. And we were talking a little bit before we started recording. The leagues are at 2 different points in their histories. Obviously, first year for PLL, and the MLL, I think, is at a more integral time when it comes to attendance. You just saw the PLL add the big sponsorship with Gatorade and obviously other organizations over the last few months. And the MLL, I'm not sure where that revenue's coming from other than ticket sales. Obviously, they have some connections when it comes to advertising and whatnot, but it's hard for me to believe that they're getting more revenue from anywhere other than ticket sales. And when some teams aren't really drawing as much as they would have hoped, those numbers are going to be lower. So when it comes to what we'll talk about next with merger potential and all those types of things down the road, they're just at a different standpoint in the league, and it's really not looking at apples to apples. The long-winded answer there, but I think attendance is really more important this year and probably going forward for the next few for the MLL.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I definitely think they probably put a little bit more stock in it. I think you make some good points about it being more pivotal for the MLL, and obviously right now they're a little bit lower than the PLL in attendance. But if you ask me why the MLL hasn't been successful, I wouldn't point to it being attendance. It's definitely been stagnant for the past 4 or 5 years, but they're not making any strides, not because of their attendance. Attendance is just a small slice of that big pie. It's they're not getting these broadcast deals like the PLL has. They're not getting these major sponsorships. They do have some big ones like New Balance and Bud Light, but it's nothing like super huge. That's kind of why they haven't really taken off recently. You could only watch them on ESPN2 a few times during the summer in past, and even then it was either recorded or the broadcast isn't anything like it is at NBC. So that kind of segues into our next question from a fan, and he wants our honest opinion. It's at the Mike O.R. Abona asks, what's your honest opinion of the fate of the MLL? How long can there realistically be 2 leagues? Do you think one will fold, or will there be a merger like the NFL and AFL or NBA and ABA? And that's a good question because, honestly, I don't think we can answer that just yet. But when you look at mergers and acquisitions, you got to look at what value does each league bring. And I think that's where the question lies. You might like the PLL's gameplay a little bit better, or you might like the MLL because of their city roots. That's fine. But that's not what they're going to be discussing when it comes down to mergers and acquisitions. You got to come from a value standpoint, and whether these leagues would actually put aside their differences at some point to merge. But right now, I look at it. The PLL has the broadcast down. That big deal with NBC. They have the better players. I think the top players in the MLL could play easily against some of the top PLL players, but there's definitely more of a drop-off in the MLL, and, no one debates that. But then, the MLL does have its community ties. A lot of people overlook that. They're very involved in the community. I mean, just looking at the Military Appreciation Day that they threw this past weekend with the Bayhawks, and events like that, they do a lot with the youth, clinics throughout the summer, and other community organizations. So you can't really forget about that aspect as well. But when I look at it, I just don't think the PLL would have any reason to want to acquire the MLL. And I don't think the MLL obviously has any desire to eventually acquire the PLL if that was to happen. And then when you look at a merger, they're just going in different directions right now. They're taking the sport in two different directions. And that's not to say one's going up, one's going down. It's just a different path to what we all want to see, and that's the sport grow. But, we talk a lot about how it's kind of the NFL versus the AFL or the NBA versus the ABA situation for lacrosse. And the more and more we go throughout the summer, I think it's looking less like that. And I think one of these leagues is just going to have to outlast the other. I don't know. What do you think, Adam?
Yeah, it's definitely different than when the AFL and NFL merged. If you look back at kind of history when it came to that, ironically, the starting point was fairly similar, where the AFL was started because a lot of owners were unable to get into the ranks of owning an NFL team. You could say that's pretty similar to Paul and Mike trying to buy the MLL and rebrand it like they wished, but so they started their own league with the PLL. But from there, the NFL merged with the AFL because they kind of felt that the AFL was going to get pretty big, so they wanted to kind of squash that early, and that's not going to happen with the PLL. If anything, the PLL would eat up the MLL potentially, and they're different products, like you said. So the two footballs from the football side of things, those were similar products, working to kind of towards the same goal, competing against one another, and this is pretty vastly different when it comes to that. So I don't see the merge happening anytime soon. I think this is going to take a couple more years, to be honest with you. You talked about the 3-year plan for the PLL, potentially with how their investor groups are working. We don't know what it looks like from the MLL side. That's something that's super intriguing to me, is we're kind of in the dark with the MLL. With the PLL, they kind of talk about the forward-thinking side of things and what's to come. And obviously there are a lot of things we still aren't 100% sure on, but we really don't see a vision when it comes to the MLL. It's kind of status quo. Obviously they rebranded with the logo and whatnot, but it's just a little bit different. So we don't really know what their long-term plan is for the league. So that kind of muddies the waters when it comes to deciding how long this is going to last. And heck, you don't know if they folded 3 teams after they already had a draft. So it seems like they're riding by the seat of their pants a little bit more than the PLL. Not to say one's going to outlast the other, but it's just interesting because we don't really have the plan for what the future of the MLL is.
No, yeah, I'd agree. And the PLL, they have the funding right now, but we don't know how long that's going to last. We don't know how they got to be burning through a lot of cash right now to make a lot of this work, with the broadcast. I know Paul talked about how it wasn't a media buy, so it's definitely a partnership with NBC, but, they're still fronting the cost probably on a lot of, the production side of it. They're pumping money, into these stadiums to be able to play there. And, I'm not saying that they're not going to be successful, but there's a lot of underlying factors that we don't even get to consider whether, a league can be viable. I mean, just look at the AAF. Everyone loved the AAF. It was a good change of pace. Everyone loves football. It was nice watching it. They had the CBS deal. What happened? They ran out of money and they folded, before the season even ended. And I don't think the PLL is that financially unstable, so I don't want to really compare them to that. But that's just an example of how everything can look great one moment and then kind of go south. So, again, we just got to keep monitoring it. We're not fortune tellers. We have no idea what's going to happen, but that's kind of just the way I see it right now. And, unfortunately, I would love to have a PLL versus MLL Super Bowl for lacrosse, but I don't think that will ever happen, unfortunately.
I will say, when you bring up the AAF, one of the main investors for the PLL, Joe Tsai, just took complete ownership of the net. So one of the main investors has more money, I think, than the AAF had altogether. So I think they're definitely in more financially stable at this point.
No, yeah, absolutely. And it's great to see him become the full owner of the Nets, because I think, we need a guy like that who's business savvy and already got his foot in professional sports to kind of, help out this league go where it needs to go. But, that's kind of our thoughts on that. So some great questions from our listeners. We appreciate it. Keep sending your guys' feedback. And with that, we'll take a quick break and we'll get back into the game recaps that we have from this past weekend. Hey everyone, thank you for listening to another episode of the Pro Lacrosse Talk podcast. We've been using Anchor for our podcast since the very start. Anchor gives you everything you need in one place, and better yet, it's free. They allow you to easily record and edit your podcast so it sounds great and send it out to all the major networks such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and many more. Better yet, they connect you with advertisers so you can start making money from your podcast right away. So if you're interested in starting a podcast, download the Anchor app today or go to anchor.fm to get started. All right, welcome back. So let's dive into these MLL games, Adam. We had some really good ones, 2 overtime games. The one in particular that caught my eye was the Blaze versus the Lizards. So what did you see from this game, and what do you think really stood out going into the final stretch of this MLL season?
The Lizards kind of find a variety of ways to lose. You know, they get blown out one week, give up over 20-some goals to the Bayhawks, and then this week have it close and try and pull it back and outscore the Blaze in the fourth quarter, and you think they may have a chance to win this one. And then Brian Cole, who had 3 goals on the day for the Blaze, comes out of a scrum, nice ground ball, and puts it in the back of the net, beating Austin Kaut for the game winner. So Blaze are lucky to pull this one out. They're 1 game behind the Bayhawks and Cannons for first place. They have a game up on them, so they're the Chesapeake Bayhawks and Cannons are 7-4, while the Blaze are 7-5. So another big win for the Blaze to stay atop the leaderboards for the standings. Mark Matthews, I talked about that being a homecoming for him a couple weeks ago. I thought that'd be a big move for the Blaze, adding him back to the roster like he was a few years ago. Had another strong day with 2-2. Alex Woodall had a great day for the Blaze as well, winning just over 50% of faceoffs at 14 wins. Also had a pretty absurd one-handed goal where he picked.
That goal was nuts.
Yeah, absolutely. Picked it up with one hand and then went from there the entire way down the field with that one hand and shooting one-handed. They were lucky enough to pull this one out. Like we've seen in the past, Tommy Palasek had 2-2 and now is the all-time leader for a season in assists for the Blaze. So I think this one's over when it comes to the season for the Lizards. They obviously, we talked about parity in the PLL before, the parity in this league for teams that get blown out one week, come back and lose an OT. We'll talk about a few games going forward, but it's going to be tough for the Lizards to get back into playoff contention now, and I'm not sure where they go from here. It'll be interesting to see, but another big win for the Blaze.
You know, they're kind of getting hot at the right moment, pun intended for that. It was nice to see them pull out that win. Again, you mentioned the Lizards. They can't seem to win the games that matter the most against the teams that they're fighting for playoff spots with. Definitely disappointing for them, especially considering we don't know the status of Rob Pennell for next year. So it would be interesting to see where they go and where they finish at the end of the season. But some teams on the upswing. First I want to talk about the Cannons a little bit because, they had a phenomenal game against the Bayhawks. The game itself was really scrappy, and the Cannons never really led actually until late in the second half where they kind of pulled out in front and took the lead. But, of course, Lyle Thompson doing Lyle Thompson things had to tie the ball game and send it to overtime. But then, Zeddy Ballgame, as he's been deemed on ESPN SportsCenter Top 10, put one away to give them the win. So they're sitting at the top of the standings, and they've kind of flown under the radar. So I really like what I saw, especially out of Connor O'Hara. Out of Bucknell, he had three goals for a hat trick on the day. We talked to him earlier. So the Cannons are looking good right now. Nick Morocco's playing well in cage. He had a ridiculous save. That'll definitely make our top plays. So Cannons are on the upswing. And then the Rattlers, they've won 4 straight. And this game was actually a lot better of a game than the last one against the Outlaws. The Outlaws, played them well. It was tied 6-6 at half, but an explosion of 8 goals by the Rattlers in the third helped them cruise to victory. Jack Curran had 5 goals, and Ryan McNamara joined him with 5 points. He had 3 goals and 2 assists. Voigt was a little more quiet this week. He only had 1 goal and an assist, but it was still a great defensive effort by the Rattlers again. Sean Scanoni coming up big again with 14 saves. So they're on the upswing right now. If you looked at the stat sheet, you kind of would scratch your head how the Outlaws didn't come away with this one. But, the Rattlers are just a little bit more opportunistic. But tell me about this Outlaws team, Adam, that's now lost 4 straight.
Yeah, and they're sliding. I just don't get it. They're just not clicking like they did earlier in the season. You know, it's like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and I don't think Dr. Jekyll's coming back anytime soon with this squad. It's just sloppy play in areas that you're not expecting a squad like this to be sloppy. And, you know, they were tweeting out the last time they had a streak of 3 losses in a row. They went on to win the championship that year. I'm not sure if that's going to be the case this year. If they're able to turn around, there's still plenty of time. And I mean, how the standings are, like we were just chatting, they're still in playoff position right now. They have 2 games up on the Rattlers. So we'll see where things go from here. But it's just surprising to see a team like the Outlaws, who have some pretty strong veterans on their squad, who have been in the MLL for some time now, struggling like this. So Dylan Ward played pretty well in cage, but it wasn't up to his standards I'm sure he'd consider. But we'll see if Dylan Ward can bounce back from these last few and really get back to that all-pro playing potential we've seen him in past seasons.
Yeah, no, and you know, I think too the Outlaws, it's not like they're not getting production out of their big guys. You know, Kavanaugh, Courier, Grant Jr. all had good games, but 2 to 3 points just doesn't cut it. You know, if you want to pull out these wins, and again, like I said, the Rattlers are just a little bit more opportunistic. You could just tell watching the game that the Outlaws looked like they fell asleep a few times on transition and let the Rattlers get these, you know, easy goals, and I think that was kind of the difference maker in this one. But the Outlaws need to get one here to get, you know, their confidence back, and the Rattlers are still, you know, treading water right now, so going to be a fun end of the MLL season. You know, a lot of parity in this league as well. We talk about the PLL having a lot of parity, but the MLL has been pretty even-steven the whole way through as well.
Yeah, and it's pretty surprising considering how earlier in the season, when there were a handful of games played, we were talking about the top 4 were settled. We were like, well, I guess the Rats and Lizards are out, and those are the 4. But since then, it's been complete opposite scenarios for the Outlaws and the Rattlers. So I can see Chesapeake and the Cannons and Blaze in there, but at this point of the season, you don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, no, and another important thing to remember, too, with the MLL is it's based on head-to-head, not goal differential first. And right now, you know, the Rattlers are leading the Outlaws 2-1 in the series. That could come to hurt the Outlaws later if these 2 teams end up, you know, having a similar record towards the end of the season.
Yeah, it'll definitely be big. They don't play each other again before the playoffs. So they've won that head-to-head, and they just have to keep winning.
Yeah, no, definitely. So we'll be keeping our eye on that. But let's shift gears now to the PLL and discuss some big moments from this weekend. The biggest one for me was Connor Fields to Josh Byrne, double behind the back. Josh Byrne, I know, said on the broadcast, he's like, you know, when you catch it behind the back, you got to finish with behind the back. I thought that was great. And he had quite the comeback, coming back from injury. He looked like he never skipped a beat. So it was nice seeing him come back and getting the overtime game winner in the game as well. And then, you know, the Archers, though, you got to give them credit. They fought back. I feel like in this game, you know, again, the Archers' transition defense has still been their Achilles heel. And then also they gave up 2 easy goals on 6-on-6 that gave the Chaos a 2-goal lead at the end, which they eventually erased, you know, thanks to Tom Schreiber and Ben McIntosh at the end. But you know, you just can't give up these easy goals, especially to a team that does so well on transition like the Chaos do. And they end up, you know, dropping it in overtime. That win would have probably put them in the playoffs. Now they got to win one more to get in. They're still sitting in a good position, but definitely disappointing for the Archers to come away without a victory.
You know, it's crazy to think that, so right now they're in that 3 spot, and a win next week gets them into the playoffs, potentially. And I could see the Archers missing the playoffs, and I could see the Archers winning the championship. Is that crazy to you?
No, I agree.
It's really just a mixed bag of what you're going to get from the squad. And, you know, they don't necessarily have the worst games ever. You know, that in their losses, they're not getting totally blown out. But it's just crazy to me to think that they could win the championship or out of the playoffs and going for that first overall pick. So I'm super intrigued. We'll talk later on what we're looking forward to this weekend. And I'm super intrigued to see what the Archers do going forward.
Yeah, it is a little concerning that they haven't been able to close these games out, because once playoff time comes, if they do get in at the 3 or 4 seed, they got to win out. There's no backup game like the 1 and 2 seed have. So definitely a team to watch. I agree with you. I think I could easily see them winning it all, but they definitely have to figure some things out. It's the little things right now that I think are hurting them.
And we talked about that two-headed goalie monster. That wasn't the reason why they lost this week either. They were about 50% from the cage. Adam Gittleman was 45.4. Drew Adams was 54.5. They basically combined for 11 saves on 22 shots, so on cage. So that seems to be working still. So it's just super interesting to see. They're my most intriguing team going into this final regular season week.
And again, too, with the defense, it's not like the defense is playing bad. They held the Chaos to 12 goals. They really haven't given up that many goals all this season. But it's those little mental breakdowns that they have, like I said, in transition. And sometimes, in that Atlas game, even last week, they just let guys run through them all the way to the cage. I think, they don't make teams work as hard for their goals. So I think that, could potentially bite them in the butt come playoff time. But let's talk about another team that's still got playoff hopes. They're still alive. It's the Atlas. Thanks to the guy you said was going to have a big game, Paul Rabel. Tell me about this game, Adam.
Yeah, it was a big game for Mr. Founder himself, Paul Rabel, a 3-1 with the dagger in the fourth quarter to get the Atlas this victory. They kind of won despite Trevor Baptiste having his lowest winning percentage at the X this season at 54.5, tying that number. So usually that's the first place you go to when you look at the Atlas's win this season is his success at the X, and they won despite that. They had some really strong play from obviously that attack line. Ryan Brown had 5 points, 4 goals, one of them being a 2-pointer. Chris Cloutier had a really big game. You look at a win for the Atlas, and it comes when that attack line plays well, and then they had strong success from someone like Paul Rabel as well. So big one for them. They needed a prayer when it came to that goal differential side of things, and we'll talk about that a little bit. The Whipsnakes, who's another team that's on the upswing, they answered that prayer for them with such a decisive victory over the Redwoods. But another big game for the Atlas coming up this weekend. Another one where potentially they win and they're in. So I'm super excited to see what they do going forward. And they've been another one that has kind of been up and down. Hopefully they come out to play when it comes down to those playoff games.
The Atlas are fighting for their playoff lives, and you predicted it last week with Paul Rabel coming up big, and they needed a big game out of him. They needed their big guys to come to play, and it looked like the Chrome were going to run away with it early, but they kept fighting back, and Trevor Baptiste had one of his worst games of the season, but it was still above 50%. So he's just been dominant at the X, and I think if not Face-Off Man of the Year award winner, I think he could easily get MVP if they end up making a run for the championship as well, because he's been the only consistent thing from week to week for them. And he's really delivered and gotten them those much-needed possessions so that they've been able to hang in these games with these teams. So, they're definitely a team to watch. But let's talk about the Whipsnakes that you mentioned. Matt Rambo, 4 goals, 3 assists. The team ended up scoring 17 goals, against the Redwoods, 17-4 blowout. And they got scoring from all over the field. I mean, Rambo had the biggest day out of anybody, but you had Drew Snyder involved, you had Ryan Drenner, Connor Kelly, all the big guys came to play. Mike Chanichuk, another 2-pointer, shocker there. So they came out with a statement win. We talked about how whether we were worried about them, and I said I'm not too worried. I think they'll bounce back, and they did in a resounding way this past week. So they get the win, they get a playoff berth, and they're going to be, one of the top 2 teams going into the playoffs. So it's going to be them versus the Chaos in the first round. Winner chance at the championship. Loser will still get another chance, but that's going to be a fun matchup to watch in 3 weeks. But let's talk about the team that worries me the most, Adam, the Redwoods. Let me read the stat line to you. If you didn't watch the game, you would have thought it was a lot closer than it actually was. Each team, had 29 ground balls. The Whipsnakes had 43 shots to the Redwoods 37. Whipsnakes had 14 turnovers, where the Redwoods had 17. Each team had 16 caused turnovers, and they were even 50 at the face-off X. So pretty even on the stat sheet. But the difference maker was the quality of shots the Redwoods were taking were so poor. They were shooting 10.8%. They looked like chickens with their heads cut off all day. They couldn't get in rhythm at all. The defense, would have, good series. Then they let one in like right at the end, or they were getting killed on transition. They couldn't really figure it out. They just looked lost the whole game. I don't know. What did you see from this Redwoods team?
Yeah, the shots they were taking just weren't successful, putting them in a successful situation. Kyle Bernlohr had a great game as one of the best goalies in the league, 11 saves, and only let in 4. But, I mean, at the same time, only getting 15 shots on cage in one of these professional games, it's just not going to cut it when it comes to the shooting percentage. What was it, about 10% on cage shots? That's just not going to do it for one of the 6 best squad in the world. And I'm nervous. Everything that could go wrong went wrong for them when it comes to not only losing, and the loss wouldn't have been that big of a deal to an extent if they hadn't let up so many goals. This puts them in a really tough situation. They don't have the luxury of having whatever they do be the only decision maker when it comes down to the final week of the regular season. They had the driver's seat, even if they had lost this by a close one, and now they have to wait to see what happens when it comes to the Atlas and the Archers games as well, to see if they have a chance to make it into the playoffs. So that was the one thing I took out of Nat St. Laurent's interview after the game. He was the most frustrated, not that they lost, but how they lost, and now they don't have control over their own destiny.
Yeah, and they had some unlucky breaks too. Like they hit 4 pipes. They had just as many pipes as they did goals, but too many mental mistakes. And I think that's kind of what cost them in this. But you mentioned the goal differential. That's going to play a huge factor. So right now this playoff scenario is the Chaos versus the Whip Snakes. Depending on who wins each game will determine the seeding, but each of them will be playing each other in the first round. And then the 3 and 4 seeds are up for grabs between the Atlas, Archers, and Redwoods. And right now you have the Archers sitting at a really good goal differential with 3, and then the Atlas and the Redwoods are sitting at the bottom, with the Atlas at -10 and the Redwoods now -13 thanks to that blowout loss on Sunday. So it's really going to be interesting. Like we said, the Archers really just have to win one, barring any major victories by the Atlas or Redwoods, which would be nearly impossible. Those teams would have to score more than 16 if the Archers win. But if the Archers lose, it gets a little more interesting, and the Atlas and Redwoods are just hoping that they can get their win on their side, and then they can put a few home to give them a nicer cushion going to the goal differential. But right now you got 3 capable squads competing for 2 final spots, so one of these teams is going to be on the outside looking in and having to play the chrome for that draft pick as opposed to trying to make it a championship weekend.
Yeah, and I think we texted about this during the game. It's pretty crazy when you look at the standings that only 2 teams out of the 6 are going to have winning records. We may have a few that have a 500 record, but literally only 2 teams are going to be over 500.
Yeah, no, it kind of shows just again the parity of the league and how tight these games have been. That was only the second blowout that we witnessed was the Redwoods versus the Whip Snakes, other than that Chrome victory over the Chaos. So it's been very closely contested the whole season. So yeah, so it's gonna be a fun final weekend of Premier Lacrosse League in Albany, and we'll be looking forward to watching it. But let's segue into our game picks, Adam. I know you have some thoughts on who you think is gonna win this weekend. This past weekend, though, I came away victorious. I was 4-2. You were 2-4. So I'm sitting at 31-23 on the season, and you're 28-26. You gotta get some wins back this weekend in order to catch up. But let's go into MLL first. You'll go first for the MLL picks. I'll go first for the PLL. But who do you have between the Rattlers and the Cannons on Saturday?
They spurned me this week in the Rats when I picked the Outlaws to win that one. But I think the Cannons are playing really well coming off that OT victory. I think, unfortunately, the win streak for the Rats ends this week.
Yeah, I should stick with the Rattlers because, I've stuck with them and they've given me some success. But the Cannons looked good, in person when I saw them on Saturday. They're playing complete lacrosse right now, and they played a really solid team in the Bayhawks. So I'm gonna go Cannons as well in this one. So following that Cannons game, though, we have the Bayhawks at the Blaze. Who you got in this game, Adam?
This one I'm really looking forward to this weekend, just with 2 teams that are battling for that first place spot. It's going to be another close one, I think. I'm going to go with the Blaze in this one. I'm going to see that they cut it a little close against the Lizards this past weekend, but I can see the dominance of Mark Matthews and Tommy Palasek and that attack line for the Blaze continuing to play well like they do usually when they're in the ATL.
All right, I'm going to go a different direction. I'm going to go with the Bayhawks just because they still, I think, are the best team in lacrosse. They're playing really well. You got Lyle Thompson and Colin Heacock that are just producing consistently for them, and even Nico Amato is doing well in cage, and you got the double combo at LSM with CJ Costabile and Jesse Bernhardt. So they're the most complete team, I think, right now. They're struggling a little bit at the face-off X. They're trying to find, the right face-off guy. So I think that's been hurting them a little bit, but I think they'll get it done against the Blaze this weekend. And following that, then, we have the Lizards at the Outlaws. Adam, who are you picking between these two squads?
I thought last week would be the revenge game for the Outlaws against the Rattlers, and I'm going to stick with them. A blind squirrel finds a nut every once in a while, and I think, unfortunately, the Lizards are going to be on the wrong end of some angry Outlaws this week, and I'm going with the Outlaws.
Yeah, I'm picking Outlaws as well. I think, this is the game that they're going to get their confidence back. Max Adler's been still dominating at the X even despite these losses, so I think he gets it done against the Lizards. And, I think they get back in the win column and hopefully start progressing, as the playoffs are upon us. We do have one more game following that one. It's the Rattlers at the Bayhawks on Sunday. Adam, who do you have in this game?
I'm taking the Bayhawks in this one as well. We talked about the success rate of teams having to play 2 games in one weekend. Doesn't usually result in a couple W's. So I'm going to take the Bayhawks at home. Another strong performance from the squad. That's one of the best in the league. So I'm going to have to take the Bayhawks. Unfortunately, the Rats are going to start that losing streak again if it comes to what I said.
Yeah, I'm going to take the Bayhawks again just because the Rattlers have to travel to 2 different cities. They'll go to Quincy and then they'll head down to Annapolis. I just think that's a lot for a team to do back-to-back. Again, the MLL needs to figure out the scheduling next week. We understand the circumstances of why the scheduling's like this, but, it's tough for these players to have to travel so much and play back-to-back games. So, I'm picking the Bayhawks in this one.
Yeah, and it's crazy to think that we're picking the Hawks when they have to travel all the way back from Atlanta. But it's something that the league's going to have to address going forward. And, this had to do with the last-minute drop of those 3 squads. Hopefully this is something that they look at in the offseason and make that change.
Yeah, no, definitely. Good point there. But let's go to the PLL then. I'll start off. We have in Albany, New York on Saturday. The night game is the Atlas versus the Chaos. I'm going to pick the Chaos in this one. I know they're already in the playoffs, but I still am not sold on the Atlas yet. They had a big win last week, but they still give up way too much goals. This Chaos team is going to score. Even Jack Kincannon in cage, who's been playing well, isn't going to be able to stop this firepower from this Chaos offense. And, I think they're going to struggle to score against Blaze Reardon. He's been still playing really, really well for this Chaos team. So I think the Chaos outs the Atlas's chances this weekend.
I'm going the reverse side of it solely because I want Sunday to be just as exciting as Saturday. I'm going to pick the Atlas in this one. I think Paul is starting his hot streak. They're going to play well, and they're going to get this W, and then it's going to come down to the 2 games on Sunday to determine who makes the playoffs.
All right, so we're picking different teams for that one. On Sunday, the Archers are playing the Whip Snakes. I'm going to go Archers here. I think they're going to get it done. They're winning, they're in. I know we talk about how the Chaos, I don't think are going to take the foot off the gas. I could kind of see the Whip Snakes, though, doing this. I don't know why, but I just feel like I don't think it's in Stagnita to have them take a step back, but I just see them kind of coming out a little lackadaisical. They had a big win, on Sunday. They're already in the playoffs. I can see, them kind of sleeping a little bit on the Archers, and the Archers are hungry. They're bitter from that overtime loss past weekend. They could have been in already, and all they have to do is really pull out a victory against the Whip Snakes this weekend. So I think they get it done and they win in this one.
Yeah, I do as well. I think they're going to get the W in that matchup, and it's going to be a big game because we haven't talked about it yet, but the Redwoods Chrome games before that, so they're going to know what they need to do, and I'm kind of excited to see the likes of Marcus Holman, Joey Sankey, and Tom Schreiber coming up big when they need it.
So then our final game, which will be the biggest of them all, with a lot of playoff implications riding on it, is Redwoods versus the Chrome. Chrome are obviously out, but I'm going to pick the Redwoods, not because I don't think the Chrome are going to give them a good fight, but because Jules Henningberg's coming out party was against the Chrome. When he was first traded, he had those 8 points against the Chrome. Huge day. He's been, very quiet the last 2 weeks, and I think that's kind of why they've been struggling. And I think he's going to come out strong against the Chrome's defense this coming weekend, and I think he's going to lead them to a playoff berth.
Yeah, and I want this one to come down to the last game of the season from in the regular season, so I'm going to pick the Redwoods in this one as well. Timmy Troutner didn't have the best day, kind of was left hanging out to dry from his defense in a good bit in that blowout against the Whip Snakes, but I think he comes back, has a big game.
All right, so I think the Atlas are going to be on the outside looking in. You think all 3 teams that are vying for those last 2 spots are going to win, so it's going to come down to goal differential if your predictions come true. So it should be an interesting final weekend in the regular season.
I so badly want it to come down to that last game. I want to see that drama that comes down to the final minutes of a game if they need a goal, either with their winning or losing. I'm really excited to see this last week of the regular season.
Yeah, no, definitely going to be a fun final weekend. We're both excited, so we'll definitely have our eyes peeled for these 3 matchups. With that wraps up our podcast. We ask that you guys go ahead and subscribe if you enjoyed this episode. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Leave us a review. Feel free to listen to our other episodes. We have our Bros in the Pros episode with brothers Jake Bernhardt of the Whip Snakes and Jesse Bernhardt of the Bayhawks currently out, so give that a listen. Coming up, we also have head coach of the Chrome, Dom Starja, and Chaos midfielder, Deemer Class. So those episodes will be coming out in the near future. And then our online contributor, Ty Cunnington, had an early PLL MVP candidates article on our website, so be sure to check that out. Some really great stuff there, too. So we hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and with that, let's get into our overtime. Adam, what are you looking forward to most this weekend?
I'm looking forward to those Sunday games to see what happens. It's got to be those last 2 games of the regular season.
And I'm looking forward to these PLL games as well, but I'm also looking forward to more reviews. @PurpleGuy45 had a review on our Apple Podcast page. Quote, "This podcast couldn't have given me what I wanted from a lax podcast anymore. The omission of pure stats and numbers is easy to follow, and the interviews especially are very well prepared. Cap it all off with a huge variety of interviews and topics across several leagues makes this one of the most elite lacrosse podcasts. Good job, guys." Unquote. So we thank you, PurpleGuy45, for your review. We hope we get some more reviews like that. Glad that you guys have enjoyed listening. It really means a lot. Started this podcast for ourselves, but it's more, for the fans and, for lacrosse players themselves to have a platform to kind of share their stories. Because, we're just fans like everyone else. So it's been an honor putting these episodes out, and we're glad that everyone's been enjoying them. So with that concludes episode 16. Thank you all for listening, and we hope you tune in next time to Pro Lacrosse Talk.